not incarceration. Education, not deportation. Education, not incarceration. Education, not deportation. Education for our communities, not education for capitalist profit.
Ow!
And before I conclude, let me just say something about feminist issues.
Good feminist issue.
Ow! Specifically about reproductive rights.
Awesome.
In the aftermath of the elections, I saw one of the, I don't know, maybe it was MSNBC, a comment that had come from Twitter. And somebody said, oh, the rape guy lost. And the response was, and this is how the Republican Party was being characterized. The response was, which one? Because you remember there was Richard Murdoch from Indiana who had said that pregnancy from rape is something that God must have intended to happen. And then before that, Todd Aiken had said that if it's legitimate rape,
She's gonna get pregnant. We're Transformers. You're
arguing against abortion rights. The same politicians who are opposed to reproductive rights, women's reproductive rights in general, also opposed to LGBTQ rights. It's important that Obama is the first sitting president in history to endorse gay marriage. Not that marriage is the best thing to endorse.
yeah.
But you see, you have a feminist approach. You can argue that marriage is a civil right. After all, black people were not allowed to marry at all.
That's true. That would make them people.
Thus, the tradition of jumping the rules, right? And then certainly, black and white people were not allowed to marry each other, and that had to be achieved through struggle. But marriage itself is a capitalist institution.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
So a feminist approach brings in all of that. You see, you can both be in favor of the civil rights of marriage, and you can be critical of the institution as a capitalist institution. And let me say that here in this country, we learn geography as if the U.S. was the center of the entire universe.
That's literally true, actually.
You need to learn other language. How many of you speak languages other than English?
I wish I was fluent.
Does
Ebonics count? What'd she say?
5 years from now, I want to ask the same question. I want everybody to raise their hand. And especially with a larger and increasing Latino population, everybody in the U.S. should be able to speak Spanish.
Yeah, true.
I want to conclude by saying something about an issue that is very close to my heart. And that is the issue of Palestine. And let me tell you that when I was in jail, I received messages from people all over the world. I received this very moving message from Palestinian political prisoners who were in Israeli jail. And it was written on like brown paper, because they didn't even have proper paper to write the message on. It was signed by many prisoners, and I really treasured that message almost more than any other message, because it had to be smuggled out of the prison. And I knew that the prisoners who had signed the message were in jeopardy for having supported me. And then it was smuggled out of that prison and smuggled into the jail where I was. And I was describing this during a visit to Palestine last summer. And someone came up to me in Jerusalem a few days after I had indicated this in a speech, and he said, you know, I was one of those political prisoners who signed the message that was brought to you in your cell in 1971. And it was extremely moving to be able to embrace him and realize that we're still in the same struggle 40 years later. He is still very much a supporter of the struggle against racism, and I'm still very much a supporter of the Palestinian people. And I should say, some people think that if you support Palestine, you're being anti-Semitic. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Well, I always point out, I first got involved in the Palestinian struggle when I was a student at Brandeis University, which was founded in 1948, the same year of the founding of the State of Israel, and it is a majority Jewish university. I learned how to support Palestine from my Jewish friends and classmates. And during my trip last year, I was very shocked. And memories of growing up in the Jim Crow South began to flood my mind when I saw signs in occupied Palestine that prohibited Palestinians from driving on certain highways. And they reminded me of the signs of my youth, you know, white and colored. They didn't say Jewish and Palestinian. They said authorized. You know, only authorized vehicles are allowed to drive on this road. And not very long after the trip, a group of young Palestinians decided that they would resist that law. That they would get on the buses that were designed to transport Jewish settlers from one illegal settlement to another illegal settlement in occupied Palestine, even though they knew they would be arrested for riding those buses. So what do you think they call themselves? Freedom Riders. They call themselves Palestinian Freedom Riders. And not they were recapitulating the struggles of black people in this country. And I want to urge you to find out more about what is happening in occupied Palestine. There is an anti-apartheid movement that is developing against Israeli apartheid. And let me say the United Nations uses the term Israeli apartheid. Jimmy Carter He's a
great one.
I would like to have him when he was president. A great former president. And remember the anti-apartheid movement and historical memory. I'm not talking about remembering because I know many of you are too young to participate in that movement. But anti-apartheid activism in the U.S. and other parts of the world brought the kind of support to the African National Congress that they needed to be able to overturn the system of apartheid in South Africa. And you've heard of Nelson Mandela, right? Everybody knows Nelson Mandela, right? Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King. But Mandela was called a terrorist in those days. Nobody supported him except radicals. Because he was assumed to be a terrorist because he was involved in an armed struggle in Congo-Sizwe against South African apartheid. And today, Mandela is a savior. So you see what movements can do. And I was planning to say a few words about prison abolition, because I think that should be on the Black agenda in the 21st century. But let me just encourage you to find out more about the possibility of abolishing prisons as the dominant mode of punishment. And let me say that Palestine is the largest open-air prison in the world. So there's a connection between the prisons that contain so many members of our communities here and are destroying the talent and the beauty and the potential of our community. There's a connection between mass incarceration, racist-inspired mass incarceration in the United States of America, and the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And as a matter of fact, if you ever visited Palestine, you would see the prison technologies, carceral technologies, not only in the prison, but everywhere. You see checkpoints, you see gun towers, you see a wall that stretches for hundreds of miles, a wall that is 20 feet high. And so in a sense, if you're talking about abolishing imprisonment as the dominant mode of punishment, you would have to also think about how you would abolish the way in which those carceral techniques, the work of the prison has shaped the larger society.